Okay, so happy birthday, Buckminster Fuller. He was born on the 12th of July, 1895, and died in 1983. So Richard Buckminster Fuller was an American architect, systems theorist, author, designer, inventor, and futurist. He styled his name as R. Buckminster Fuller in his writings, publishing more than 30 books and coining or popularizing such terms as spaceship Earth, Dimaxion House, Dimaxion car, Dimaxion map, ephemeralization, synergetics, and tensegrity. Fuller developed numerous inventions, mainly architectural designs, and popularized the widely known geodesic dome. Carbon molecules known as Fullerness, yeah, I guess, were later named by scientists for their structural and mathematical resemblance to geodesic spheres. He also served as the second world president of Mensa International from 1974 to 1983. So he was what is called a Renaissance man in our time. And I think he was an interesting man. And again, he was a man who did what he did because he felt doing what he did. And so, nobody asked him to do what he did. He did because, in a way, he was born in order to do what he did. So there are two pictures, him in the older days and him as a young man. I think we need people like him, people who, out of the joy of discovery, discover new things and dedicate their lives to creativity fully. In 1928, the Dimaxion House, if I pronounce it correctly, Dimaxion House, I guess. I like the drawing itself. It's the way he used the writing in an ornamental way. I used to do this too when I was younger sometimes. Anyway, he was a self-made man, and it shows. Everything he did was born from his intelligence, from his mind, and from his heart, from his imagination, and not from necessarily from the dogmas of a school. He was in love with the future. Just like what we saw in that video from Architectural Association, there also there was a high concern with what we call the future. It's very difficult to think everything ab ovo, meaning from the egg, from the beginning through, without the dogmas of, the architectural history of what professors told us and so on, but this is true creativity. You generate a world starting from nothing in a way. And that's what he did. I mean, again, like in the drawings of Le Corbusier and other examples, the car is so obsolete, and the structure, the section, and what we see of the house is truly, they are separated by a large span of time. But he himself designed a car, and in fact, Sir Norman Foster recreated it or remade it himself. We are going to see it. I would say that in many ways, the very creative architect is some kind of a dilettante, some kind of an amateur. because first of all, the word amateur is degraded in our time in opposition to the professional. So in opposition to the professional, the amateur is the one who is rather superficial, inefficient, and so on. But we forget that the word amateur comes from amare, which in Latin means to love. That's the source of the word amateur. You do something out of love, not because you are paid. The professional does works because he or she is paid. The amateur does works because he or she loves doing something. Now, he might not be very efficient. He might not be very, rigorous sometimes. But one thing is for sure, what the amateur does because of amare, because of love. And the dilettante also is one who, I mean, the word derives from delight. Unfortunately, the world of professionalism killed a lot of that love, because when you are paid for doing something, you might do that something correctly. But what happens to love? Love cannot be measured in money. And, many times the professional is a cold-blooded being who is efficient, who does things correctly, who often maybe or sometimes does things the right way. But I suspect that often the professional, and especially in the field of art or where emotions or feelings are involved, is deficient, because in those fields you do need love, and there is a tension between the professional and love, and between the professional and the amateur. But because our world is obsessed with efficiency, our world loves or appreciates a lot the professional, and delegated or relegated the amateur to the gutter of culture. But it wasn't always like this. And there were famous architects, actually, like Sir Christopher Wren, who was actually an amateur, and who built St. Paul Cathedral, plus many, many others, like 40 more churches in London and many other buildings. And it was even the so-called concept of the amateur, the gentleman architect who didn't have a train in architecture, but practiced architecture out of passion for architecture, essentially being an amateur. Anyway, in these works, Buckminster Fuller was essentially an amateur. He created new things out of his restless mind and an incredible desire to in a way to change the world. And that's what all creators do. And this is what, unfortunately, many products of the school systems do not do. He lived himself in such a house. I hope I have here images with that. Now, I don't know if this was his contribution to the house, these little curtains here. Anyway, it doesn't matter. A touch of domesticity there. Interestingly, this plan actually matches unplanned plans of old African villages, where there are round buildings built by less than amateurs in a way, because those people didn't have any knowledge. And I was wrong. It's not that they didn't have any knowledge. In fact, they had knowledge. The old knowledge that was transmitted maybe sometimes or all the time or often orally um, or verbally. So, this moves me that the work of a futurologist is actually meeting, so to speak, the work of so-called primitive people or primitive societies. So in 1927, Fuller resolved to think independently, which included a commitment to the search for the principles governing the universe. This sounds big, and help advance the evolution of humanity in accordance with them, finding ways of doing more with less to the end that all people everywhere can have more and more. Now, I don't know about this having more and more anyway. By 1928, Fuller was living in Greenwich Village and spending much of his time at the popular cafe Romany Marie's, where he had spent an evening in conversation with Marie and Eugene O'Neill several years earlier. Fuller accepted a job decorating the interior of the cafe in exchange for meals, giving informal lectures several times a week, and models of the Dimaxion House or Dimaxion House were exhibited at the cafe. Isamu Noguchi arrived during 1929. Konstantin Brâncuș, an old friend of Marie's, had directed him there, and Noguchi and Fuller were soon collaborating on several projects, including the modeling of the Dimaxion car based on recent work by Aurel Persu. I don't know who Aurel Persu is, but obviously he was Romanian. It was the beginning of their lifelong friendship. So, Buckminster Fuller and Anne Hewley Dome home, they really move me, these experimental houses, because I truly believe that Louis Kahn was right. Beginnings are in harmony with a human being. And this is about beginnings. You begin new things. And this kind of house would be, in most schools of architecture, would be, criticized for not doing I don't know what. But, obviously someone like Buckminster Fuller didn't care about what the schools of architecture might have thought. I like the drawings. Look, they are very rigorous, but also somehow poetical and graphically enticing. Look how he wrote here. He modeled the writing in harmony or in conjunction with the drawing, kind of like in the illuminated manuscripts of the Middle Ages. Very nice. Do we do this in our projects? No, we don't, because we are not playful, because we have Cartesian minds, and we would not do something like this. We simply would not do. Because this also requires a certain level of, it's about aesthetics. You want to make the drawing nice, and appealing. And again, it takes a certain attitude about creating even the drawing for a project in a certain way, in an original way. And look at the house. The house itself is original. Who cares that these pieces of furniture probably were found on the street or whatever? The skin of the building is enticing, is interesting, is a creation. Hello, I hear a voice. Please, if you want to say something, please do so. Otherwise, please turn off the microphone if you don't mind. Thank you. Okay, so we move forward with Buckminster Fuller, and here he is with his wife. Now, he was doing rather well, I would say. I mean, you know, he has rugs and, you know, bibelots and, you know, little sculptures. Well, he's in his older age here. But in essence, any creator is a child, an eternal child, and it doesn't matter the age. You know, you can tell he was a collector here. He collected various things, but he lived in the house he conceived. And I think his wife was admire him for this. Anyway, I don't know if these are students or what, or architects, or that man is really risking his life there. How come he's not afraid of falling? Anyway, its life was an adventure. Its architecture is an adventure. This is what it is about. And as long as we can do this for ourselves, life can be joyous. And if we don't do it, life can be a bore. I read yesterday something, and in fact, and I forgot, I went to sleep, but I read something that I like very much. Apparently, Robert Kennedy of the famous Kennedy family in the United States said, only those who dare to fail greatly do great things. Now, this thing was said in various forms, but with a similar meaning by other people. Let's think about this. What does it mean? Only those who dare to fail greatly are able to do great things. And I would say that it is so. If you are not, I mean, you risk, and by risking, you could fail. You fail. But if you don't risk, you don't achieve anything really. You know, you just take the middle path and, you know, comfortable, but you don't risk anything. You don't risk failing miserably or greatly, but you also don't create anything. So I guess in our life, we have to choose. Do we choose the comfortable road and everybody works on and we don't risk anything? But we do risk something. We risk getting bored and producing nothing creative. Or we take risks and we risk failing terribly. We take great risks and sometimes we do fail, but it is only from that attitude that you can bring in the new. I totally agree with what Robert Kennedy said. And in fact, I thought of writing something under the name architecture, ERRCHI, and so on, architecture from the verb to err, which means to make mistakes. Because if you are afraid of making mistakes, you are not going to create anything. Back is though. Now, we see two kinds of houses here, this one and this one. You know, the traditionalist would say, this is the one I love. You know, I don't need these experiments. I don't need these unvertical walls to create problems for me to furnish it or whatever. But the unconventional mind would prefer this one because this one is engaging, is provocative. And I mean, it's still not a big thing really. But it's kind of funny that in the same image we see two different houses, very different actually. These things were also built for the US Army, as you can see. This a variant of this house that he created. Wichita House, 1946. it's very difficult to do something like this if you are if your mind was conditioned to only think with right angles and to only think in a certain way. In order, like Walter Gropius said, the mind is like an umbrella. It works best when it is open. But to have your mind open is not easy when you are conditioned by years of, so-called studying seriously how things should be done. Yes, it looks it looks like an extraterrestrial's house, something built by an extraterrestrial. But I like this because this is my belief that the extraterrestrials are us. We are the extraterrestrials. That's why we have the beginnings. It's this house it's ahistorical, but in this I think it is a promise and it gives hope. This is the car he made, which Sir Norman Foster, who loves cars, recreated, and we are going to see it. A very nice house. Not, I called it a house. It is in a way kind of like a house on wheels, but the car itself is brilliant. I mean, aesthetically is brilliant. It looks interesting. I myself would like to drive such a car. I don't have a car. I don't even have a driving license. But maybe for such a car, I would have made the effort to get a driving license, for God's sake, once and for all. I'll die before having a driving license, which would be is already almost unacceptable by the standards of today. Imagine 1933, he designed this. Now this poster was done recently, but the design was done then. Not bad. I think we are approaching the one. Here is Sir Norman Foster. He recreated, I don't know for what reason, maybe. Anyway, I like the fact, and I even like Sir Norman Foster that he did so, because here he is a child himself, just like Buckminster Fuller. Two children, one died, this one is alive with us, but it's this conjunction of efforts over time which moves me, and the toys, because in a way this car is like a toy, brought joy to its maker and brought joy to the one who refurbished it or remade it. So the Dimaxion map from 1943, not limiting himself to any one discipline, Fuller took on cartography with this invention, credited as the first two-dimensional map of the entire Earth's surface that shows it without distortions. To create the piece, Fuller projected the world map onto the surface of a three-dimensional icosahedron, which was then unfolded and laid flat. Again, discovery, again, the child, the eternal child in Buckminster Fuller. He experimented. He arrived at new solutions to maybe problems that were old, but he wanted. This is what happens when you see the world with the worlds of a child. I regret that I'm unable to convey the truth of the last words that Steve Jobs uttered when he spoke to the graduates of at Stanford University. This was 1 or 2 years before he died, and he told the students, well, the already the alumni, I mean, they graduated. He told them, stay hungry, stay foolish, stay hungry. It is exactly what I probably fail, but I would love to know that the students, if they have hunger, to keep it, so to stay hungry. If they don't have the hunger, to get it. Without that hunger, you are losing your life. It's not only that you are losing architecture, you are losing your life. It's immensely important to have that hunger, to be like a sponge, like a child, extremely curious, seeing the world anew with fresh eyes. If you don't have that hunger, and if you don't have that foolishness, because this is what Steve Jobs added, stay hungry, stay foolish. You have to be also foolish. But who is foolish like this? The one who is in love, the lover of life. You know, if you are not mad and if you are not hungry, you will fail. You will fail in life and you will fail in architecture or whatever you do. You have to be mad. You have to be foolish. You have to be hungry. Unfortunately, this message somehow doesn't arrive where I would like it to arrive. It's sad because I think the imagination that every one of us has can make us make life much more interesting, but we are not listening to our own imagination. Tensegrity structures from 1949. Look at him, he's like a child. He smiles like a child. And only a child can create something like this. Of course, there is mathematics here. Of course, there is engineering. There is ingenuity. There is rigor. But essentially, it was a child who made it. And he smiles like a child, although he is probably 8 years old. Through his extensive research, inventions, and structural experiments, Buckminster Fuller created the term tensegrity to describe self-tensioning structures composed of rigid structures and cables with forces of traction and compression which form an integrated whole. In other words, tensegrity is the property demonstrated by a system that employs cables, traction, and rigidity of other elements, usually steel, wood, or bamboo, capable of acting under the intrinsic stresses, traction and compression, together and simultaneously, giving greater resistance and formal stability. It creates an interconnected structure that works biologically like muscles and bones, where one element strengthens the other. For Georgia Victor, it is used today to explain the organization of the elements that make up living beings according to the characteristics of their geometry. This spatial organization forms a continuous field of tensions and compressions in constant equilibrium in a game of tensions with the force of gravity. And these are structures built after he died, using the principles that he worked with. And in essence, it's about complementarity, is about bringing together even opposite forms of activating energies. So you create in a way something that is stable and unstable at the same time, some kind of a mixture between stability and instability. In general, the system works by joining opposing forces, and according to Fuller, is the structural basis of nature, capable of, with a minimum of elements, forming a strong structure. American contemporary sculptor Kenneth Snelson a former student of Buckminster Fuller's, played an essential role in the development of the structural system, working with pieces composed of rigid and flexible components. And here they are, adults being childlike. And this is the clue to being creative. But in order to do this, you have to combine work with pleasure or with playing. And this very often we don't do. That's why our work is so often dull, because we eliminated play or playing from it, and it's fatal. Snelson's work that best embodies the system is the Needle Tower, a sculpture created in 1968 measuring 18 meters high, 6 meters wide, and 5.42 meters long, that allowed Fuller to theoretically develop the idea from tensile integrity analysis. The geodesic dome designed by the architect already hinted towards the notion of the tensile structures in 1948, despite the difficulties met in the assembly process of the prototype, which stood only for a few minutes. It's a beautiful tower, and I mean, I'm not familiar with the mathematical or the engineering elements involved here, but aesthetically, I admire its strength in fragility. It's very beautiful. Rigid bars act on compression forces and are arranged in an isolated, non-touching manner, complementing the steel cables that receive tensile forces. The concept was expanded, incorporating structures that may not be self-balanced, but which contemplate the principle, formed by tension cables and compressed bars isolated from each other, just like in Fuller's geodesics. It's order and disorder, it's freedom, but it's also, it's a freedom which does not destroy a system. It is a system which is able to assume maybe a high level of freedom, even of expression, without collapsing or dissolving itself. Very nice. I only can evaluate it aesthetically. If you are interested, this is you can find an interesting material about these tensegrity structures on Arch Daily. Now, the geodesic dome for the Ford Motor Company from 1953, of course, he is very well known for this geodesic dome. This personally is not of my preferred creations coming from Buckminster Fuller, because it's too, in a way, not necessarily monolithical, but it's a form in which I do not perceive with sufficient power of expression the periphery. I don't know if I express myself well now, but this geodesic dome, which is famously connected with him, I find less interesting than what we just saw. The Tokyo Tower, this was a project he did in 1958 and was not selected, but it's an interesting project. I would say it's elegant, and I mean, look at the scale. The Eiffel Tower on the left, so it was supposed to be huge. Poor Gustave Eiffel, I wonder what he would have thought if he saw this. He probably would have laughed or applauded it, because, I think between two levels of excellence, you know, there is no envy, I would say, I would hope. Quite tall, 8,000 feet. Okay, so nobody said that Buckminster Fuller was the most modest man on earth. But if he was immodest, it was, I would say, the immodesty of a child. The Tokyo Olympic Stadium is kind of funny that this today I saw the Olympic Stadium in Tokyo that was designed, unfortunately, by Kengo Kuma, in my opinion, a deplorable and very banal Olympic Stadium. If he copied Zaha Hadid, as Zaha complained and even went to court with Kengo Kuma, I don't know, but the end result is surprisingly mediocre, considering we are dealing with Japan. But this is the work from 1958 by Buckminster Fuller. Unfortunately, I don't have, I couldn't find pictures of it. Anyway, so this is another work by him. Fuller's interpretation of the rowing boat sees the vessel paired back to two streamlined and lightweight hulls known as needles. I'm a little bit lost here because of all these technicalities. Foster said that Fuller considered the needles his most refined design, the purest expression of doing more with less, in a recent interview with Vanity Fair. Now, why Foster gave interviews to Vanity Fair, I don't know. Anyway, this is another invention by Buckminster Fuller. Flies I Dome, 1965. For the Flies I Dome, Fuller's final prototype for low-cost portable housing of the future, he aimed to reduce the structural weight of the dwelling. The result comprises transparent bubble windows across a partial sphere made from fiberglass. These bulging glass windows, which resemble the eyes of a fly, could be swapped for solar panels and rainwater collection systems as part of the architect's continued ambition for an autonomous dwelling machine. (1959). The submersible is designed to be partially submerged underwater to protect apparatus known as an oil derrick from damage caused by stormy weather. In this, he was rather an engineer. The concept formed the starting point for an investigation into creating a habitable, weather-resistant floating city in Japan. But after Fuller's investors died, this proposal never made it off the drawing board. Anyway, this must be studied in detail with a technical private apparatus, if I can call it so, which I do not have, but we can look for a few seconds and see that the man had many interests and obviously he was an innovator. The vector equilibrium jitterbug duo vector equilibrium is a stainless steel wire sculpture comprising struts arranged in a tetrahedron patterns that are connected by hinges so that it shifts about when touched. It is one of the more fascinating kinetic sculptures in the exhibition. Edward Sella, who curated the upcoming Los Angeles exhibition, told the zine. Specifically, the sculpture uses an interconnected twisting, contracting, inside-outing dynamic action that allows for the fixed structural system to achieve the closest packed unit radius. I didn't understand much, but uh, whatever it is, it does look interesting. And yeah, he was as I said, continuously attempting the impossible to bring peace between stability and instability, or as Frank Gehry would say, to create a happy instability. Now, the Monreal biosphere from 1967, which was the United States Pavilion at Expo 67, which had a big fire at one moment. This again, this work for me is not necessarily one of his best, but he is highly appreciated for it. I mean, technically, I'm sure it was amazing, but architecturally speaking, yes, there is a complexity here because of the weaving of all these metallic parts, but the centrality and the perfection of the spherical surface leave me a little bit unsurprised. In my opinion, it is a little bit too self-confident. Unfortunately, you wanted to extend this so-called concept to the whole of Manhattan or a part of Manhattan. And we are ending the presentation on him with that proposal he made, which fortunately was not built. But as a self-supporting structure, it is impressive, of course, and it is big. I'm not sure how that tree feels inside there, but we don't talk with trees, so we don't know. Here he is on the cover of Time magazine. And yes, it happened this, I don't know the cause, but anyway, accidents do happen. Now, a proposal by Buckminster Fuller in 1960 to put a giant geodesic dome over Midtown Manhattan. The purpose of the dome was to regulate the weather and reduce air pollution. Personally, I think it's a good thing was not built, because I don't truly believe that this is the way to escape pollution and so-called weather. Why are we to regulate the weather? Why? What's wrong with 4 seasons? We already, the climate change is regulating kind of the weather because we don't have a winter any longer. So I think, with all due respect for Buckminster Fuller, I think he went a little bit too far here. You know, I don't think is anything wrong with having you know, differences in the weather, you know, to have 4 seasons and so on, to have rain, to have snow, to have even warm weather and even humidity. This way of escaping, you know, the naturalness of the world, to me is not the most inspiring one. But this is my reservation, so to speak, my reticence towards what he proposed here. The dome running from the 62nd Street down to 22nd, so 40 blocks, was to be a mile high and 1 miles across, according to his biographer. Its skin would consist of wire reinforced one-way vision, shatterproof glass, mist plated with aluminum, to cut sun glare while admitting light. From the outside, it would look like a great glittering hemispheric mirror, while from the inside, its structural elements would be as invisible as the wires of a crimped porch, and it would appear as a translucent film through which the sky, clouds, and stars would appear. Well, even if you didn't see, you know, the physicality of the structure, that physicality did exist if it was built. And I don't know. I mean, this separation between man and nature, with the purpose of so-called protecting human life and creating perfect conditions or whatever, I'm skeptical of. But anyway, this is what he proposed. Sometimes there are limits in what a child can or is impelled to envision, I would say. Sometimes the child could become a little bit immodest, I would say. Anyway, so I don't know what this is, Under the Dome. Yeah, it's a website where you can read about this project by Buckminster Fuller. Okay, so this is it with Buckminster Fuller, and now we go to the second presentation on an interesting German architect. Let's see. Okay, Oswald Matthias Ungers, 1926-2007, born on July 12th. So Oswald Matthias Ungers was a German architect and architectural theorist known for his rationalist designs and the use of cubic forms. Among his notable projects are the museums in Frankfurt, Hamburg, and Köln or Cologne. This was the man, and a serious German architect, no doubt. And I think some of his buildings are interesting, although maybe they are not as fluid as we might like these days, but there are virtues in them, and I will talk about them when we arrive at those works. Here he is with a portrait of Schinkel on the left, the sculpture. Perhaps he admired Schinkel, a very important 19th century German architect. Okay, some drawings. Yes, you would say, but I wouldn't describe them as being rationalistic, although, yes, he uses right angles and so on, but they're rather metaphysical. Even this one, you know, it's the way he expresses graphically what he wanted to express, to me is not, I mean, yes, on one hand, it is rationalistic, but on the other hand, it's also surreal somehow and metaphysical. because reality doesn't really look like this. This is still a conceptual drawing and with a high level of purity, meaning of dreaming or dreamlike representation of the ideality of the project. Okay, this is a house, but I don't know if I have a picture for this one. No, I don't, but I have for this one his own house from 1958 and 1959 in Köln. And I think it's a remarkable house. I don't know if he's still alive. I know one of his houses was demolished, but I like this house. It has movement and it has abstraction, and I think it's interesting, and it also has tactility. Its tectonics are not, without interest. Yes, it still exists. Not bad. A good work by Ungers. Reminds me a little bit of the early works of Mies, although it is different. But the fact that he worked with brick and with opaque walls. Another house, a Steinmal house. This one also interesting. And this image is taken from the website of created in Suceava by a young Romanian architect, where you see this bluish thing here is from off houses. And there are some excellent examples of houses in that very rich website. But this is a good building by Ungers. Surprisingly woven, although it is with a strict geometry, but the walls are woven. And I don't know if this building still exists. Very different, of course, from Buckminster Fuller. But I mean, Ungers is more of an architect, as we understand an architect. But it's kind of interesting that both Buckminster Fuller and Ungers were born on the same day. You can see you can have two people born on the same day, and both architects and their work can be very, very different. Scandal. I don't, maybe this one was destroyed. Yes, you see, why it was destroyed, I do not know, but it's very sad. So when we create a building, we very rarely think that, you know, that building could end up just as this one did, and not because of old age. Sad, very sad. Okay, now I don't know what this is. Why don't I have here some wording? Probably I come back to this building, which is an interesting building. I call it metaphysical. Now, this is the German Architecture Museum in Frankfurt, 1979 to 1984, operating within an existing context, urban context, and he worked inside those existing buildings. I don't know. I mean, in my opinion, his earlier work, which was private, those private houses was superior. Here is too much whiteness for my taste and too much perfection in a way, and not enough tactility and not enough tectonics. But maybe as a background for architectural projects and architectural models and so on, but still seems to be a little contrived to me. But there are interesting things, even here. You know, this one also in Frankfurt, 1980, 1983, is this work here. I don't know. I mean, a little bit forced, I would say, with this symmetry and these little square windows. And but postmodernism was already, you know, in 1980, 1983. Postmodernism was ravishing the world of architecture, and it seems Ungers himself succumbed to it. He was not the only one, of course. It still has a certain level of purity, but 1991, 1984, I don't have pictures there, but these works, personally, I don't like so much by Ungers. You know, they remind me a little bit of Aldo Rossi, but Aldo Rossi somehow was more exuberant within strict geometries. This is the Germanic spirit, and it's rigorous and so on, and it's clean, but it's a little bit morose, I would say. But this is nice if you like the Pantheon, and there are no reasons to not to like it. Of course, this is not the Pantheon, but probably when he made it, he thought of the Pantheon. But the problem here, I would say, is that the transition from the cube to the sphere, from the square to the circle, is too brutal and too simplistic. And I would say there is a problem with this. The former main building of the Institute for Polar and Marine Research in Bremerhaven, 1986, a large building. Where is it? Bremerhaven, I don't know where this is, but this makes me think a little bit about the architecture in Hamburg, and of Fritz Höger even, who was an expressionist. This is not really an expressionist building, but this facade somehow makes me think of some works done before the war. It's kind of like a ship. What is this? In Berlin, 1993, 1996, a large block. He was I mean, you know, he was a rationalist in the sense that he used, even here, you see the grid, the square, but in some of his works, I think he achieves a certain level of architectural poetics that are very close, I think, to what might be called metaphysical architecture. And I'll have here a project, at least one project, which exemplifies what I try to say. Not this, though. I mean, you know, this is a department store. It's a large building meant for consumption. We cannot talk about metaphysics here, in no way. A residence for the German ambassador in Washington, D.C., 1994. So obviously he was a very appreciated architect if he was invited to design the residence of the ambassador in Washington, D.C. Again, if you compare this building with his early houses, I would say that he became stiff. Huge dwelling. It looks like an embassy, you know. I mean, it's the house of the ambassador, not the embassy. You can only imagine how the embassy looked like if the house of the ambassador looks like this. Now, what is this in Köln, 1994, 1995? House without qualities. I love the title. I love the title, and I think the house itself has a lot of qualities. Is this one. This is, in my opinion, one of his best works, not just because it is called a house without qualities, but because it has a lot of qualities which are discrete. Its reticence is remarkable. I call this is a very poetical house. It's done with apparently with simple means, but it has incredible complexities here within this apparent simplicity. Like you see here, there are these exterior spaces that are enclosed. You will look at the plan. I like this house very much. And this is a house by a philosopher, for a philosopher. I imagine a philosopher would love this house. It's very pure. And look at the plan. It's very speculative in a way. You know, what is going on with these? There are these small spaces where things happen, and then in between them the open spaces, but which are part of they appear to be part of the thickness of the exterior walls. It's really a very interesting house. I mean, really, I look at this image, and this could have been part of a surrealist movie. It's so pure and so, in a way, mysterious, although it is very cerebral and rational, but it's also mysterious. In this project, I don't think, although the plan, you saw it, is very, very rigorous, but I don't think his spirit was stiff when he made this project. Now, a Museum of Contemporary Art in Hamburg, 1995. A very large building. I mean, just a fragment of the building could have been, a sumptuous villa. Maybe for Hamburg is okay, this building, maybe. Although I think, I don't know. I don't know Hamburg so well, but I think if the building found some inspiration in the building that is not far away from it, would have been better. Because like this is not truly an opposite of this building, but at the same time is not having communication with it. It's still kind of aloof somehow, chromatically as well. But if you think of a museum as being, in essence, a big storage room or space, but no, I'm also thinking of the museum that his compatriot, Joseph Clyhus, built in Chicago, also a museum of art, and a little bit similar with this. In contrast, I welcome the exuberant, fluid museums of our time. Although there are interesting things, the interior, yes, the grid is the grid, but there is a certain complexity here at work. In Berlin, 1998, 2001. Yes, I mean, again, the name of Joseph Kleikus comes to my mind. Almost a typical urban intervention in a city like Berlin. It's correct, it's clean, it's civilized, but there seems to be a but somewhere. Another museum in Köln is this one here. Although I would have preferred this building to have some of the fragmentations of the buildings that are close to it. It's too blunt, it's too big, it's too, I don't know, monolithical. The interior, I guess, has some qualities, but the outside is a little bit heavy, I would say. Fortunately, there is art, and maybe, hopefully, good art here that brings some sensitivity to the space. You see, the building is like a huge valise, a huge box, very blunt and uncommunicative, really, with what is happening outside. Now here, maybe things are not so bad because of these shadows and this corpse that fragment a little bit, and then the vicinity of this church. This is more acceptable, I would say, but from what we saw here, this is not very, there isn't a lot of porosity here, to use the word of Stephen Hall. Entrance to the ruins of a Roman bath in Trier in the 2006. The truth is, after a while, one can get tired of architecture. And I mean, this is not bad, but I don't know, after too much works by Ungers, one wishes to maybe do something else. Another villa, Glashütte. This is also interesting. It's I think in the smaller houses, he's able to achieve what I call a metaphysical architecture. We saw already a picture of this one inappropriately placed at the beginning of the presentation. Now, by contrast, nature is always beautiful, of course, as long as it is not covered with a geodesic dome by Buckminster Fuller. And the house is, as a contrast to nature, it could probably be accepted. Now, of course, Frank Lloyd Wright would have protested, because this is not a building that grows from the earth and creates a unity with the nature around it. No, it's a distinct, entity in a landscape it is actually strange from. Of course, we can also comment on these columns which support nothing. An opulent villa, of course. It has a level of cerebral elegance, but that's it. So happy birthday, Oswald Matthias Ungers. And with this, we end our trip in the work of these two architects today.